I hope today has been a great day so far, and welcome again, if I may, to the AIF 2025 here in Kampala. I can see there's a fairly interesting audience here. This probably speaks to the topic. This session will be exploring innovative financing mechanism that actually spur the adoption of productive uses of energy. Um, we know it's a key driver for socio-economic development, and suppliers vary in their approach. So we are really fortunate to be joined today by very interesting panelists, just to give a sense of how the session might roll out. We will be going through just a brief couple of slides to frame the discussion for those who are not already aware of productive use, and then hearing from our distinguished panelists so that they can share their insights before we move on to a more open discussion with questions with audience. So buckle up, this will be very interesting. And if I may, can we move on and start showing a few slides? So moving on to the next slide. So the intent here is really to explain what we mean when we are talking about productive uses of energy. Can we roll back, please? So here we are really referring to how energy is used. There's a lot of emphasis, and rightly so, on the need for access to energy. But what do we use the energy for? And that's where we make the greatest difference, I guess. It's the economic activity that's empowered by productive use. And once integrated in mini grids, for instance, it can dramatically change the economics of the mini grids. But another perspective is the one for rural communities, boosting their livelihoods, creating new economic opportunities, and creating revenues, really. We've seen very different type of productive use in different sector, and the following slide, if we can move on, does highlight different sector where we can have economic revenues, increases in economic revenues. Can we move on to the next slide, please? I mean, the following one, the one after. Again. Thank you. So really different application, whether in the agricultural side, cold storage, making sure you can conserve the goods, whether in industrial application, such as welding, for instance, or laundry. We've seen very different iteration of productive uses. And then a really more social one, healthcare, education, which I think we all aware of, are one of the big needs in rural communities, and more classic, such as commercial one, phone charging, hairdressing. So very different, various approaches, various business models that apply. And in terms of business model, the following slide, the next one, highlights two business models that are quite interesting. One around pay-as-you-go. Can we move on to the next slide, please? And the other one around lease-to-own models. So you can see the applications are quite different, and that there are gender implications as well, as we consider some of the productive use application. So there are interesting programs, initiatives such as the EAP, which stands for Energizing Agriculture Program, implemented in Nigeria. That's looking at very different applications in rural communities, I think over 20 communities in Nigeria, and measuring the impact they can have on the communities and their livelihoods. And there are a few lessons learned. That's what the following slide, please, highlights. Very different around access to capital, around potential business models that needs to be considered, and around the need to to consider the equipment, its financing, but also the capacity building for those equipment. So you can see there's a range of impact-driven consideration as well as commercially focused application. So how to strike the right balance, how to find innovative ways to basically finance those applications. And that's what we'll be really interested in diving into in the next minute. So, to do so, I'm really pleased to welcome Marina Aboud. Marina, if you don't care to join us, please. Marina has over 16 years of experience in inclusive finance and rural development. She has been at ADA, in short, a Luxembourg-based NGO for over 16 years and is working to promote entrepreneurship and strengthening capacity in private sector, especially microfinance institutions. Our next panelist is Gary Almond. Gary, please. Gary is head of communication and advocacy at Shell Foundation, and he has been with the foundation for close to a decade now and worked on their revised strategy to empower livelihoods across sub-Saharan Africa. Following Thomas Bonissel from Schneider Electric, Thomas is a seasoned professional with close to 2 decades now of experience in Schneider Electric, and he has been working to support energy access program in the Middle East and in Africa, including a social initiative Schneider Electric is leading and started 3 years ago with the ambitious objective to impact over 100 million people. Next, Gaetan Tiako. Gaetan is an investment manager at Triple Jump, an impact investment firm with $1 billion assets under management and focusing on finance and climate. So Gaetan leads the investment in clean energy companies across sub-Saharan Africa and India. She started her career in strategic banking and advisory for a leading French bank. Last but not least, Hadija, we'd love to hear from you. Hadija is a social innovator. She is actually our representative from Uganda here today, and she has close to 15 years of experience in agri-tech. She co-founded EcoLife Post-Harvest Technology, a social enterprise that advances solar power processing hubs and integrates financing models to enhance youth livelihoods. So, panelists, thank you so much for agreeing to join us today. I hope we'll have very valuable insights from you, and we'll be looking forward to all the really testing questions the audience might share with you. I wanted to kickstart very quickly with you, Gary, because it's really interesting to have with us today a philanthropic perspective, if I may say. And one of the questions I was really curious to hear about is Shell Foundation's perspective on the barriers that are holding us back in terms of, access to finance. Why is it so hard to get some finance to spur productive uses of energy? And what are the significant challenges you've seen over the year, and the effective intervention you can think of to overcome those barriers?
I'll try my best. So thank you for having me. I lived in Kampala about 15 years ago, and I haven't been back since. And it does just remind me that we're in the weeds of this work, and sometimes we don't stop and see progress made, but actually coming back to Kampala after so long, you do see dramatic difference, which is amazing. Yes, thanks, Francis, thank you. So I'm from the Shell Foundation, and I'm going to start. We published a piece of research last month. I was really glad to see on your slides there. The research shows productive use energy isn't it's not dominated just by solar irrigation and cold storage, which I think is danger we sometimes fall in. There's lots of informal opportunities. There's lots of informal uses of productive use of energy. This research that we published was created by the Future of Energy. It was co-funded with the UK government through their Transforming Energy Access platform, and it pulled data from more than 150 suppliers. It had in-depth interviews with more than 30 across India, Nigeria, and Kenya. And as you say, the challenges that came up most prominent were access to finance, specifically matching the needs of the supplier to instrument, ticket size, and criteria of the financiers, regulations, and then customer awareness. What I would say, I'll go through each one in turn, but I think there's, and it came through in the sessions this morning, this sector feels still very fragmented. There's lots of small players and there's lots of players operating in their own sphere, and that fragmentation needs to be addressed. That's a root cause then of before we get to any of these challenges. So at the foundation, in terms of finance, so we're a grant provider primarily, but we've struck a number of partnerships to build a continuum of capital. We have a co-funding partnership with the UK government, with the FCDO. That's a dollar-matched partnership that effectively doubles the amount of grant we can put into early-stage innovation, into venture building, and into research and development. We then have follow-on partnerships with the DFIs in the UK, in the US, and in the Netherlands, which provides more concessional capital for those companies that are ready. And then finally, we work with private asset owners and asset managers, but also we provide catalytic capital into funds, which provide that next layer. And altogether, we estimate that this partnership model we have has created a $900 million continuum of capital that can take a productive use supplier through testing, piloting, growth, and ultimately to scale. So the call to action there, I think, is to look beyond your own finance and to look at, we have a saying in the foundation to how can we steer more money into the sectors rather than maybe put directly more money. In terms of regulations, this is hard, right? And so I'm just going to talk to what the foundation has done here, because I think we'll come back to this later on. But we've, over the years, created or co-created a number of non-profit institutions that are intended to act as conduits between the private and the public sectors. So they represent sectors, so think of the African Mini-Grid Developers Association, the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association. Shell Foundation was both instrumental in the creation of those, or in-country accelerators, and we have some in Ethiopia, Uganda, and Nigeria. Last year we announced that our institutions work was going to be collated under one facility. It's the Energy Access Institutions Facility, EAIF, which is obviously an overused acronym this week maybe. CLASP of managing that. But my call to action there, I think, is there are groups that are consolidating, that are addressing this fragmentation, that are looking at quality control issues, public policy issues, VAT, tax, import issues, and can provide one voice. And again, that would address that idea of fragmentation across suppliers and other supporters. The last piece was customer awareness, and I'm wary on this one. It's very easy to talk in obvious truths. I think what I'd rather do, is just, I'll give two examples that I've seen very recently where I think companies have done this well and how they've done. So I was lucky, I arrived in Kampala on Saturday. Sunday, I got to travel to a mini-grid site on an island in the lake, and they had a productive hub that was supporting fishermen, fisher folk on the island. So it had an ice machine, had some fish processing machinery, water purifiers. And I was asking them on the boat over, and there's no such thing as a stupid question, but I feel like I might have asked a couple, and I asked, what was the biggest challenges? And it wasn't the financing, it was that customer awareness. And then we asked how they broached it, and it was about the community leader starting with them, because there were so many myths and mistruths and embedded beliefs around what energy could do. They went straight to them. The island had two communities, and they had to be the two leaders. But it took off. Now, my stupid question was, well, could you not take that community leader from one island and use them to go into another island? This does talk to the challenge, because they would, no way, that would be absolutely worst thing you could do.
the best financing model that has worked for us has been the blended financing model that includes grant funding, in-kind support, and subsidized loans. In the beginning, 5 years ago, we thought having a grant, deploying the technology, the rural community is enough. But later we discovered that we needed capital for the farmer groups to be able to process the raw material using the deployed technology to produce value-added products. Along the way, we also realized that in-kind support was very important, having scientists and engineers available to train these operators to walk the journey with them in the operation of the technology, to have the in-kind support to help them build value-added products that can be sold beyond the village level. And that was also something that demonstrated that blended financing that includes grants, in-kind support, and subsidized loans can work well. Just one point, we also tried out the lease-to-own model, and this was really fantastic, where we had a cooperative group coming up to support acquisition of the asset. Yes, it worked well. They acquired the asset, but the ownership and the operation of the asset, that is the processing unit or the preservation unit, is in the power of the entrepreneur from the cooperative. Hence, the products they produce can only meet the standards of that village level. What does that mean? It means the payback period of the loan takes long because they earn literally very little money monthly to be able to pay back. But the advantage is they had access to the technology through the subsidized loan or through the cooperative financing model. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khadija. I hear from what you're sharing with us that beyond the funding, beyond the subsidized loan, there's a real need for capacity building, actually, in-kind support, as you put it. And from one actor on the ground to the other, I'm looking at you, Thomas. I know Schneider Electric has had a lot of experience in terms of implementing productive use. I basically have two questions that come to mind. You've heard the challenges Gary mentioned. You've heard Khadija's experience on the ground. Do those implementation barriers resonate with you? That's one key question. And the other one is just to hear from you the innovative approaches Schneider Electric has put in place to try and remedy those challenges.
It's very important to start considering that because we see this growing and we also see the voluntary markets growing. And basically some companies are today able to pre-finance part of the future carbon credits that they will receive from the use of their pumps or their fridges over the first few years, which means that they can extend from day one a quite substantial discount in the end user price. So you can imagine how important and the difference it can make in the market if this is actually leveraged as it should be. And a very good example of that actually is Sun Culture, which is our portfolio company and has implemented with BIAN and Shell Foundation a carbon facility that aimed at reducing the end user price by 25 to 40%. So talking about affordability, I think this is also a tool that's important to consider more and more.
Thank you so much, Gaetan. I think there are at least two keywords that came up, which I'd like to dive in rather, a bit further before we turn to the audience. The first one is around partnership, and the second one around regulation. And Gaetan, you just mentioned forgivable loans, you mentioned carbon finance. One could add on result-based financing. And I'm looking at you, Hadija, once again. Yeah, how can those instruments be leveraged, to power renewable food processing, for instance, from your experience? And yeah, have those solutions been tested? Are they actually accessible as we speak now for the small farmers?
Thank you. I would love to agree with her that the models can improve access to processing and storage technologies. However, from my opinion, can we disperse financing based on key indicators, two of them? One, energy usage. Two, food loss reduction. An example, if I have a processing hub that can convert tons and tons of grain into value-added food using mega kilowatts of energy, to do that, can we also have disbursement based on those indicators? I may not have been sold to 100 homes, but I may be selling a final product to 100 homes. I'm speaking from a background. Since last year, I've been trying to access RRB result-based financing support, but it has been hard based on how many units are going to be deployed out. And my take has been, I may not deploy out 100 units, but the technology, the processing technology, is going to reach out 100 homes. Millions of people are going to buy the value-added product. And also, for us to get, this is my opinion, for us to get maximum potential of maybe, an example, the result-based financing, we need to have the incentives cutting across all the stakeholders. In food processing, the stakeholders we have the farmers, we have the financer, we have the technology developer. If the incentives can cut across all of them to reduce or to attack the challenge that is facing the farmers, that would be a plus. I would also request for us also to use data usage or digital usage data to score the credit worthiness of smallholder farmers to access processing technologies. Or can we also use customer commitment agreements that the smallholder farmers have with their customers to score their credit worthiness? Because here comes a small group, they are sure they are able to supply so many schools with value-added produce, but the financiers are not in agreement to release money based on such an agreement, which I myself find not quite fair, because I have a commitment of a customer who is going to buy from me if I access the processing or preservation technology. So can the disbursement, can the scoring of my credit worthiness be also based in that angle? Thanks.
I don't have the full answers, but I'm tempted to break that question down to the first one around partnership and turning toward Thomas. And the second one, I'll come to Marianne around credit worthiness to explain her approach. Thomas, you've just heard Hadija around, first aligning incentives, and then how to use the data, given Schneider's expertise in energy management, what do you do in terms of data usage. How can we make the collaboration between that different range of stakeholders solutions as effective as possible. I've heard technology providers, we've heard financial institutions, probably government at some point, financing, obviously. How do we make all that ecosystem work together? Just for me.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Okay. In fact, based on our experience, partnerships go beyond finance, EPC. We need to have an additional step, which is the social engineering, to know what is the real needs of the population and to make the link on a sustainable manner to be sure that the solutions that are deployed answer to the needs and they will be correctly managed, operated on a long-term approach. So for us, in our view, social expertise could be NGOs, but it could be development agencies, are critical to know the real situation and to think about sustainable approach. You mentioned, Adija, the in-kind contribution, and Marina told about awareness. In fact, both topics are related to capacity buildings, and partnerships should involve also the education, also the TVET, and all the stakeholders who can upskill the competencies. And this is one example that we are working. Actually, we are supporting 16 schools in the region to upskill at the latest technology and to make them aware of the potential of the technology. And by the way, we do believe that upskilling the youth is important, but it's further important to involve also the women. And the women empowerment for us is very important to tackle the issue of the upscaling and to address this energy transition and to have this change approach. By the way, we are publishing with the Alliance of Rural Electrification, RLE, a position paper about how advancing gender equity in the renewable sector. It has been published with RLE and UNDP. So for us, social expertise and also data, it's true that thanks to the technology, we are able to bring some data, and furthermore, we can have, of course, technical data, but also impact data. What is the real impact generated by the productive use of energy? And to convert some technical data into meaningful data, it could be the number of jobs created, the number of surface which has been irrigated, the additional revenue of a community if they are transforming their crops. So this is and thanks. This is where Schneider can bring a solution with our monitoring platform called EcoStruxure for Livelihoods. It's a free platform that enables the stakeholders to have a real monitoring of the impact, and we do believe that it's also a way to strengthen and to make this sector more attractive for the funders, for the financial body, to be sure and to have a better vision how the money is used and what are the benefits of this investment. So data for here is available. It's only a conversion, and thanks to digital, it's very, I would say, very easy and affordable.
Data, 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 and again, data. So getting the data around jobs, around energy consumption, but also being able to assess more accurately credit worthiness. How do we approach that, Marina?
Yes, so it's yes, it's very important to understand the economic potential behind the productive use of energy, each technology. When we speak about a mill, when we speak about a fridge, egg incubator, we need to understand how the revenues will be, how the business will be run. And microfinance institutions, for instance, need this information, this data, this understanding about the business model behind each technology. So this is really important to make the research, the experimentation of the technologies to be understood by microfinance institutions in order for them to be able to land. Also, what we try to do within our program, so we work with business development support organization who can really identify the right entrepreneurs, the right businesses, where to invest in the villages. And then we can link the pipeline of entrepreneurs with a microfinance institution, which makes them more confident in order to lend the clients. Also, all the social engineering within the community. So it means, for instance, to put in place some local committee that will also be a kind of guarantee that this entrepreneur is serious, that he has a good business, he has experience. So also this is really valuable for microfinance institution. And of course, because we spoke about incentive, as Aditya mentioned, so how microfinance can get incentive in order to encourage them to go to those new markets. So we experiment also result-based financing, so incentive-based scheme within the program. So it means that every time that a microfinance institution will finance an equipment to a client connected to a mini-grid, the microfinance institution will receive a subsidy. And if the client is a woman or a young entrepreneur, the microfinance institution will receive additional subsidy because it's perceived as more as riskier, etc. So, but the purpose is not to have this RBF in the duration. The purpose is that the microfinance institution can test this village, this new market, those new clients, and make its own judgment, to its own assessment about the risk. If the village is too risky, it's too risky. So it means that a microfinance institution will stop at one point to invest in this village. But if the village the clients use productive, the energy and the income generating activities are really developing, making impact in the village. So we believe that the microfinance institution will develop the portfolio there and without RBF at the end. And the RBF, the subsidies that they will receive, they can use it as they want. Of course, we encourage them to put in place a guarantee fund internally in order to be able to secure this money and to be used for the next village, the next portfolio to be developed in the next village. Of course, they can use this subsidy in order to compensate some costs. As we said, there is a high transaction cost for reaching the rural areas. So yes, it's what we try to do now, and I hope to have a result to tell you next year.
Thank you, Marina. I do hear from the discussion we're having today that it's actually a complex landscape, right? There's a need for upskilling for the actual productive users, the youth, the women that are active, some of the local entrepreneurs. There's a need for capacity building for the microfinance institutions. There's a need for innovation in terms of financing instruments we are looking to implement, and almost a need for social engineering to some extent including having the right data at the right moment. What does that entail? How do we put in place the right policy intervention? How do we put in place, the right regulatory reforms? Because I'm asking that question intentionally, as we can see within the audience, some partners, colleagues from regulators or from Rural Electrification Agency. Gary, what do we have to do in terms of regulation?
So we were supposed to have the minister on here, right? So I was sort of, I was.
You are a very minister now.
Yeah, I was anticipating this question. I was going to sort of pass it very neatly along the line. Look, I don't have the answers here. I just have our research highlighted two critical pieces that came up actually this morning. There was the import costs, and even where there are exemptions available, the processing time to get those exemptions are massive and counterproductive. So that has to be worked out. There was a suggestion on one of the panels this morning, local manufacturing capacity building is key to get more skilled manufacturing and better probably technical specifications in a market. The other piece that came up in our research was we are talking, there's a massive amount of informal work here. I think street vendors, particularly if they're doing food as a business, and often the local policies and the local attitudes towards those vendors is something that we see needs changing. But I don't have answers for you, Francis. I have just a sort of slightly more detailed couple of the regulatory pieces. I do have, by the way, I don't know how we're doing for time, but just to build on that partnerships piece, and Gitan there mentioned the carbon financing deal with Sun Culture, BII and Shell Foundation, and I'm happy just to give a very quick snapshot of that deal, because I think it does talk to what we're here, right? So you've got Sun Culture, a solar irrigation provider that is struggling to get its product to customers at a cost they can afford. Carbon financing mechanisms allow them to reduce that price and expand their reach. Shell Foundation, you asked me right at the top of this session about what a philanthropy does. Shell Foundation is able to take risk where others can't. So we could take a riskier position on the future purchasing of the carbon credits, and by doing that, make a catalytic investment which allow BII to come in with a higher ticket, lower carbon price, and so now suddenly it's stacking up. The end piece then is what's next, the future carbon buyers. What you want there is a carbon buyer that's interested in the farmer, and that closes the loop, right? Because you've then got a carbon buyer who's got a new revenue stream, but it's also increasing the purchasing power of their end customers. And so that just gives you a sort of sense of that partnership stack and how it could work. Oh, and by the way, sorry, I will, because if I don't, I will get in trouble. Our funding was co-funded with the FCDO, so there's a natural sort of linear between us, FCDO, BII, Sun Culture, customer, and in the ultimate markets, which are going to bring far more finance into it if we can prove this model. It's a great sort of stack of an example.
Fascinating, Gary. Thank you for sharing that example. You asked me about time. I think we're doing okay. I would be remiss if I do not open the floor to our audience to take questions. We'd be really interested to hear from you on the aspect you'd like us to dive in further, or perhaps the ones to clarify if there are questions. Feel free to ask whether in French or in English. We'll be happy to address them. By means of hand raising, maybe? Yes, gentlemen?
So I prefer to speak in French, but I'm not sure if all the people, they can understand what I want to do. So then I will try to ask in English so that I will make people able. So my name is Abdoulaye Ba. I'm from Senegal, Dakar. I come from Dakar, Senegal. I am a mini grid operator in the northeast in Senegal. We are running right now about 68 mini grids in Dakar, in Senegal. But here, my question or my contribution is that by another barrier, by developing productive use, most people are talking about money, but the other challenge is that by the equipment suppliers, sometimes we need some equipment, very economic, but we did not find it in the market. And by the local assembly, we find very big machines, they are not very efficiency. So how could you help us to find suppliers with, with good machine efficiency? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Basically, a question around having equipments that are fit for market and actually available in the different markets. Who would like to take on? Might be you, Thomas.
So thanks for the question, and my hat is off with 68 milligrids. Very good. No, you're right. It's a fair question. We need to have the return of experience of what has been deployed in other regions. This is why social experts, and if we are talking about agro-processing, there is some NGOs and some people who has the knowledge about what is the best solution, and it will depend, of course, of first the country, but also the type of productive use that we are talking about. So sorry to come back again, but social engineering is fundamental to have this knowledge. We do have in our partners very knowledgeable NGOs who know what are the best technology for agro-processing, and we are more than happy to share with you. But again, I think it's a question of knowledge sharing. If I can answer as a Schneider Electric, we are not specialists in the agro processing, but we can put our expertise to find the most effective solution, and again to think about the long-term approach. But it's a vast, it's an immense domain. By the way, we are working with the RRE on a circle. It's tech and manufacturer circle, exactly for this type of question, how we can share knowledge, experience, and find collectively a better approach on different countries. But this is a big area, and we are committed to work on it. But for me, the answer is knowledge, experience.
Thank you, Thomas. And just to build on that very quickly, there might be an interesting learning to gather from the Nigerian experience, where I do recall that through a program named Demand Aggregation for Renewable Energy Technology, the Global Energy Alliance for People and the Planet, GIAP, is putting in place a facility actually identifying the right type of equipment and putting that to facilitate the aggregation of those equipment. So perhaps one point to follow up on. Yes, gentlemen? A bit of patience.
Thank you very much. My name is Tiano Loritogbe. I'm a member of the Electricity Regulation Authority of Benin Republic, West Africa. My question is more on investment, so it will be certainly for Ms. Gaetan. We've seen a lot of small projects related to that question, but we are also interested in large-scale projects. I would like to understand better what are the criteria for an attractive project to invest in relation to this issue of productive use of energy, because we do hear microfinance and very small scales type of project, but not sure this will develop the continent to the level that we want for industrializing Africa. So please, could you give us some guidance on the criteria you look at when investing and how we can make it at a bigger scale?
Challenging one.
Yes, thanks for the question. I would have been disappointed if no one had asked for the magical recipe to fundraise in the sector. But I understand your point. It's true that when we look at productive use, most companies still struggle to finance projects. There has been some traction, just also to put it on the positive side, there has been some traction in the sector, especially on the equity side, whether it's in 2023, 2024, some very large rounds, over 20 million, market leaders, Coolbox and Culture. And also check the latest Google data, there's been 9 times more investment in 2023 than in 2022 in startups and seed. But I think your point is correct, is that the small project is one thing, but then we want to move to another level and a larger scale. I think in terms of key criteria that we're going to look at when we look at a company in the productive use space, the first one is obviously having a very strong value proposition, and that the company is also able to demonstrate through data. I think we mentioned that before, it's becoming the key now in the companies that we look at. And the value proposition is not only about selling the appliance or leasing the appliance, the fridge or so, it's really about going beyond that and understanding their overall business needs of their customers and offering a whole solution that will improve stickiness. I'm taking, maybe I think you have a very good example here, is basically if you look at the cold storage sector in the agricultural value chain, what is open done and what we see that makes a lot of sense in the sector is, in addition to the cold storage unit, is also offering agricultural input to the farmers, training, even an access to the market, because this is how you will really attract and retain the customers, and we know that's also a key to scale. A second point, which is extremely important, and I think is going to ring a bell compared to the SHX sector, is the cost and having a very strong cost discipline, because it's still a pretty nascent market. So most companies have pretty low volumes and haven't necessarily stabilized their supply chain or even sometimes their design. So I think we look at companies that have stable or at least control cost of production, but also cost of operation, because we know for a fact, and we've learned that once again the hard way in the SHA sector, we know that heavy cost structure just don't scale. And we look for a company that from the start will integrate into their growth mindset, that's cost discipline and that's sustainable culture, let's say. That's really also something that I think as investor we have to support. And I would say a third one and last one is probably partnerships, that we also see a lot and that we feel are important in the sector. We've mentioned a lot of partnership, but here I'm more thinking about distribution partnerships, because basically it's super hard to scale alone in the sector. And what we see from leasing companies is that they have really managed to establish very interesting partnerships, either with NGOs, cooperative, we mentioned, I think, even distribution, like consumer goods producer or distributors, etc. And this really helps to expand the reach, to scale, to diversify the customer base, and to reduce the cost of acquisition. So that's also something that we look at positively. So it's not a magical recipe, but at least it gives you some ideas.
Thank you so much, Gaetan. I do think we have an additional question on this side. And while we're doing the very innovative logistics, I do want to flag as well that we've only received questions from the gentleman so far, and we've only received questions from this end of the room. So you know what you have left to do, right? Yes, gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to ask a question. So my name is Parfait, and actually I'm a developer, a mini-grid developer in DRC. But I have a question. My first question is about the financial sustainability of some of the productive use of energy scheme. Because we've seen that most of those productive use of energy scheme, or yeah, they do rely on grant funding and they don't scale beyond the grant funding. So I wanted to ask, so what should be put in place so that at least we guarantee the financial sustainability of the financing of productive use of energy? And maybe my second question is like, when we talk about productive use of energy, mostly we do talk about the agricultural transformation. But I've seen that, I've noticed that, you know, Africa, especially in rural Africa, we are in the path of being more so digital economy. So is there also, or are there financing mechanism to promote maybe the digital use of energy in rural area as productive use of energy? So yeah, those are my two questions. So.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting those ones. I think there are quite a few panelists that could take on, perhaps Marina and Gary to start with. The digital aspect is quite new, I would say, from my perspective. There might be perspectives that are very different.
Okay, so I will try to answer this question. So on digital side, I think digitalization can be useful in order to smooth all the financing transactions between, so of course, a mini-grid developer and its clients, for instance, with prepaid meters, etc. But also in terms of financing the productive equipments. We have now the microfinance institutions are equipped also with digital finance, electronic wallet, mobile money. So this is one point. Of course, it means that the clients knows how to use this kind of technologies. Also, there are all the digitization, and we spoke about it, about credit scoring. If, for instance, the operator can share the data of energy consumption to a financial institution, the financial institution will have can also create some system to make credit scoring according to the cash flow of the person. So these are examples that we can see in the field. And I don't know if I answer the first question about the grants, but maybe you want to answer.
So what was the first question?
Yeah, so the first question, if I'm not mistaken, was related to the financial sustainability of productive use businesses beyond grant funding.
Okay, well, I mean, as a grant provider, I'm probably not the best place.
You're on the spot.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I think that's probably for the follow-on, right? So that's for me. So I'll very quickly just go touch on the digital piece. I think there's a couple of digital interventions that we are exploring. One again around the carbon finance and collating like thousands of data points from individual farmers and bring them, and how can you bring those carbons into a sellable package. Then we are also working with Co-op Bank Kenya and MasterCard, and we're using MasterCard's the name has escaped me, but it's their digital wallet technology, which connects the dots there. The key, I guess, to all these digital platforms is they need to be, same as everything, it needs to be scalable but I think the transformation that we see is the ability to trace a dollar from an international market into the hands of an individual user of the productive use energy is a game changer. Again, that data piece is absolutely great.
So if I do summarize, making sure that beyond grant funding, we actually connect the businesses to the market and the actual
yeah, I mean,
consumer.
all I would say, I'm in danger of going in platitudes here. Like the Shell Foundation, right? We support any solution, or we explore any solution that raises incomes while lowering emissions and can be scaled on a commercial basis. That's our model. Those are three things. We will provide catalytic grant if that commercial scale is there, and we have a line of sight on that. What I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone who's providing the next stage to put through their criteria, because that's not where I should.
Fair point. Khadija, would you like to touch on the topic very quickly? No, it's a firm no. I've seen one last question, but I'd love to have a lady question right there. Here we go. And I know we somewhere close to the top of the time that's allocated, so perhaps we might close with that question. I would very kindly invite all the audience to connect with the panelists if you do have follow-up questions.
Thank you. Sorry, it's not a question. I wanted to weigh in on the question by my brother from DRC, because he was talking about the specific context of mini grids as a mini grid developer. So I assume his challenges are much more challenging than the normal case for several reasons. And my name is James. I work for PIG Infraco, and so we are investors in a couple of mini grids. And we are aware of this challenge. One, the mini grids themselves are located at further to the bottom of the pyramid than the other prospective users of productive use. And those words, sometimes that play on words, it doesn't work very well. And secondly, the tariff that mini grids charge their customers are higher, generally. Unless there is a very good subsidy regime, the tariffs are higher than what the normal grid, the main grid charges their customers. So that means, one, the affordability of the products of productive use by the customers. So a hair salon, the person who goes to the hair salon doesn't have that much disposable cash, and yet they are paying for the same service at a higher price than somebody enjoying the same service in a main grid productive use context. So it's a much bigger challenge, and there are not easy solutions. It lies in, well, if subsidized financing for the appliances that can help in the charges that result in the use of that product, that can help. It lies in being very selective about the use to which you put the productive use. Gary talked about ice. I think you saw the ice. I know about the visit. You saw about the ice. So you use the grid to make ice, which is used for preserving fish, which is a high value added activity, and they can probably afford to pay for it. You also have to consider whether how close you are to the grid. In Kenya, for example, we've seen some mini grids which are close to the grid, and when you offer the same service, like I mentioned, the salon or hairdressing service, the person would rather walk 10 kilometers to enjoy the same service from a main grid person who is giving it at a cheaper price. So it's much more challenging in the mini grid context, and it's also a challenge to all the investors and supplier and providers of grants and so on to take that particular context of mini grids as a bit of a special case of productive use. That's what I wanted to weigh in on.
Thank you so much for sharing, James. Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mercy Kanyes J. I work with the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Development as an investment analyst. My concerns are three of them. I want more light on the challenges faced during this financing solutions, and then the strategy, how best can we overcome them? Then the protections that can be put in place in case the investments do underperform. Then the last one is the inherent risks that are associated with this, the inherent risks associated with these investments during the innovative financing solution.
I do first thank you for the question and thank you for saving us from our high gender imbalance. I do believe the question is aimed at you, Gaetan.
Yes, thank you for the questions. I'll do my best to answer all of them. Correct me if I miss something, but I guess just first I want to actually come back on the sustainability point because I feel like we haven't answered this point. So I just want to quickly mention that on the financial sustainability of the productive use, apart from grades, I think it's a responsibility shared between the company that develops the product, which has to have this mindset from the start, as I mentioned before, the grants provider, which has to select companies and projects that are actually commercially viable, and this is actually the approach that CEI Africa takes, and then the investor that should not, follow on if the business does not make sense. I don't think we should try to be financially sustainable without grants because it's very hard, and at some point we need to use the tools that we have in place, but I think it's a responsibility to implement a business that's coherent with that, even if the grant decrease at some point. Well, just sorry for that. But coming back on this question, maybe on the challenge to implement this financial solution, I think we more or less mentioned them, right? There is, it's still hard to find the right candidates in the productive use market, either because they're a bit small, they're not very mature in terms of technology, they haven't that much track record yet in terms of sales, the economics are not very viable or balanced yet. And I think that's for me is the key challenge when we look at companies. We try to support the sector, but the selection is pretty hard, especially given the criteria that we've mentioned. On the protection side, I would say that I'm going to invoke blended finance again, because I would say that the reason why there is concessional capital in this market is supposed to be to protect, is supposed to be to add a layer of protection for private investors. And if you take CEI Africa as an example, basically what we do is that we invest alongside crowd lenders, which means that if there's a loss, there's sort of a first loss that's taken by the foundation, and then the retail investors have a higher chance of recouping their investment. So for me, that's the best way to do that, is by blending some concessional capital. And on the risk, I don't exactly remember the question. I wrote risk. Can you repeat it, please? Yeah, I can hear you. On the indirect risk, I'm not sure I have the best answer to that because I have a financial perspective, but no, I would say that you have more or less the demand risk, being able to unlock sales using the mechanism that we mentioned, and given the affordability constraint that we know. You have the regulatory risk. There are some countries, for instance, that have not yet fully implemented exemption for solar, which has a huge impact on the cost of goods of the companies that we look at. And this is something that are always moving, that they have to basically run around. You have the credit risk. I mean, we're not going to mention them all, but I think, yeah, the productive use space is quite a complex market. There's a lot to be taken into account. That's probably why we're still where we are. But I think rather than looking at the risk, we will have to look at the impact and how much it makes sense from an economic perspective to support this sector. So that's rather the approach that we take, I would say.
Perhaps one last word, Gary?
Just on the protections piece, happy coincidence, we published another piece of research which was on the role of guarantees, specifically for addressing farmers. but it has a wide application. Guarantees have been classified, they're now eligible to be classified as ODA, Official Development Assistance. And so we're anticipating there's a lot more guarantees going to be coming into the market from the international development community. The research, I didn't prepare my notes on the research, so but I know it provides some case study examples, including ones that Shell Foundation has done, Rabobank, DFC, AFDB, and also then some sort of archetypes of the guarantee structures and how they can be potentially put in place to offer some protection.
Thank you, Gary. It does seem like a very interesting topic and a lot of conversation to follow up with. So thank you all first for your patience and for answering and sharing your insights. Thank you to the audience for your patience as well. I've received a little guidance to let you know first, we might be chased away since the next panel is to come in about 15 minutes. And second, that the coffee break is actually happening downstairs in the tent so that you do not get lost. So good luck with that. And before I let you all go, I would really kindly invite you to join me in thanking the panelists for all the insight they've shared today.